But we'll start with the two who requested to ask questions, and the first one we've got is George Colley. So George, you can come on up. We'll have a mic we can bring to you, or you can come up. It's up to you. Whatever's more comfortable for you. We can bring one to you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. I understand the need for more facilities for children and kids, but this is going to cost so much money. I guess I don't know how long is this bond for. I didn't see that. How many years?
Brian, it's 20 years or 21. I mean, I know I've heard both, but it's...
The maximum allowed is 21 years, but the current projections we have each sale at about 14 years.
So the bonds will be 14 years before it's paid off.
That is the current projections that our CPA has put together. By law, it can go up to 21 years, but the projections that we have put together currently have each sale, so it's a two sale
Right.
process for about 14 years.
So from the time the bond would be approved to the time it's paid off, do you have that number? I think that might be what George is asking.
Okay, so the second sale, we estimate the second sale will take place in approximately 2021. And then, so that would be 2035 is 14 years after the second sale.
I don't know what a second sale is.
The total bond is for a total of approximately $61.5 million.
Correct.
However, the school district does not have what's called the debt capacity. We can't sell all $61.5 million at once. So the current plan calls for selling about $40 million in bonds in the year 2018, provided the bond passes. And doing a second sale of approximately $21.5 million when construction begins on the high school, which would be in the year 2020. And so the bonds, when we make those sales, our CPA has projected a 14-year life. So the first one would go from 2018 to 2032, and the second one would go from 2020 to 2035. We do currently have some debt from our previous bond, and we will pay that off in 2027.
Okay.
So George, this whole selling bonds thing has always been confusing to me too.
Sure.
So my understanding of it essentially is that if someone said to me, we'll give you the money, but, we'll give you the money to build this, but we're not going to give you all of it at first because you don't have the capacity in your community to do it. We're going to give you some now. We're going to give you some at a later date when you have the capacity in your district to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure about house values, but no, farm values have increased so much, and they're going to keep increasing as commodity prices if you take into inflation, the lowest they've been in at least 20 years. And it's just going to be a hard thing. And then all these things always start out we need more room for the kids, and then all of a sudden there's an auditorium on there. And then I know there's talks of football fields on there. And it always starts with the kids, and then stuff gets added on and added on and added on. And so I guess I understand we need room, but I get disgusted with this other stuff that gets added on there to just throw it in.
Okay.
Thank you.
George, would you like a response to maybe how that, I can share with you, and I think there's other board members too, kind of where we came to that decision for those things that you're talking about. First, I'll let you know the athletic complex, that specifically went out in questions to our community about if we do a bond, should the athletic complex be included in it? And the responses were no. So that is not included in this bond. The auditorium was included, and all based on, there's a lot of community input that was gathered through the spring from some different community sessions that went on at the middle school. And that was based on input from the community who attended those sessions, what they wanted. There were some things that they were non-negotiables for them, like they didn't want to wait too long. There were certain things they wanted to have, and the auditorium was one of them. So that was, as a board, that was a recommendation that came to us based on what the community's input was for that. So just maybe a history on how that came. But thank you for your comment. Okay, and then the next question or comment, looks like there's two questions from Rod Marsh. Rod? You can come up or you can get a mic. We need the mic for Facebook so people can hear.
It is on. You just have to have really close.
Okay. My first question, I think the assessed value, the assessment for property owners, for homeowners, according to your figure, is 96 cents per thousand of assessed valuation for a homeowner. My question is, how does the bond assessment affect fellow business owners and farmers? How are they assessed for this?
Any of the board members want to take
Let's
that?
say, like a business owner owns a piece of property and a building to operate the business from, and it's worth $500,000 total. So I assume that it's not just private property owners in Othello, but also business owners that are going to be assessed for this bond.
Yeah, I can answer hopefully some of that. Everybody that owns property in Othello is taxed at the same rate per thousand. As far as what an actual business owner pays, it depends on what the valuation is of the business that they own, the property that they own, not the value of the business. And the same with farms. Farms are based on their assessed value is how they pay. It's the same percentage of assessed value.
Assessed property value.
Yeah, but all it's just like the houses. All farms are assessed differently depending on where they're at, the kind of farm ground they are, whether they're irrigated or real irrigated, and all those kind of things. So it's not a simple number. I had asked as a board member quite a while ago what the cost per acre is, and I found that it's difficult to just say that across the board what it is per acre because they also pay on personal property as well, tractors and circles and stuff like that. But everybody that owns property in this area, in the school district, would pay the same dollar per thousand of tax, which the 96 cents is per thousand, I believe. But I've reached out to some individuals to find out what exactly that rate is for them, but it's kind of different for everybody.
Right. Well, that answers my question.
So, Rob, before you get on to your next question, I just want to be clear that it's an additional 96 cents per thousand of assessed value in local taxes. So if you look at what our local taxes are now, that would be an additional amount. Okay.
So my second question is a little bit of concern. I wonder if one of you could reiterate approximately the current state of overcrowding in our elementary, secondary, and high school and the school system overall, especially the elementary and secondary school.
I'd like to just be able to pull up. We have a slide actually that.
I think I heard recently it was like approximately 350. It sounds like we're about 350 overcrowding in the elementary and secondary system.
This slide gives each individual school and then what the percentage of capacity would be. And where you see that, where it says I-1351, that's an initiative that was passed that reduced class sizes. They were from what they were before.
By the
And
state.
so,
The state came up with those numbers.
yeah.
Okay.
And so based on the numbers from that initiative, that would put us at where we're at with our facilities currently.
Okay, so if we look at the two red figure totals at the bottom, 3702 versus 4356, that calculates out to me about 650. We're over capacity by 650 students. So my question is, let's hypothetically say the bond measure passes. We get the elementary and the secondary complex built by 2022. Is that what you're 2022, 2023?
The 2021-22 school year or 2022-23 school year?
Occupy 21, 22.
21-22.
2022. So that's 3 to 4 years out. And then the high school renovation is even further out by a year or two. My concern is if our city our school district continues, the school district student population continues to grow at the current rate, which there's no reason to think that it won't. By the time in another 3 to 4 years, if we're overcrowded by 700 now, and given the capacity of the projected construction of the elementary and the secondary school, given the student capacity of those 2 schools, I'm thinking that by the time they're ready for occupancy, they're going to be overcrowded. We're going to be overcrowded again. We're almost going to be at the same state we're at now. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts about how to deal with that situation. You know, if the construction project foresees adding, constructing such that buildings can be readily added to the complex to try and leapfrog along and stay, at least keep up with overcrowding. It's just a concern that even if the bond passes immediately and the construction starts ASAP, by the time the construction's finished and occupancy occurs, we're going to be looking at the same. They're going to be full to overcrowded again.
Can I answer that?
Great point. I was just going to ask if anyone would like to take that on. Jen, go for it.
The way that the state does bonds isn't friendly to growing cities. You can only get bond match to what you currently are overcrowded. Instead of, we see all of this growth, we see that Olson Homes is going to be building 90 homes. There's a potential for another, I think, 250 from Angel Garza if that goes through. And of course, that's going to bring more children, more families, more population. Right. It doesn't make any sense because we are going to keep growing. It makes no sense for our town just getting smaller. And the way that the current, my youngest is a second grader, and by the time the high school's done, I think she would be a junior. And no, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but we're constrained unless the city, our taxpayers, want to come up with more funding. That extra that we project and that we think has to come all on the taxpayers. And that's not something, we're already having frustrations with 61 million being matched by 20-something million from this, anyways, being matched by the state. Then to come up with and burden the taxpayers more, it's just working the system that we have the best way that we can. Right.
So basically, what I hear you saying is, given the regulations that the school board has to follow. Given the regulations that the school district has to follow, you're doing the best you can vis-a-vis overcrowding and construction.
Yeah, and I would say we're not restricted by it, but we're trying to be the best stewards of the money that we can, right? So we want to maximize state match. And basically the state is saying, based on your population, we will give you $15 million for your projects. If your projects are 60 million or 90 million, we're going to give you $50 million for 15 million for your projects. So anything we were to add is going to be 100% on the taxpayers. So what we're trying to do is project what we'll need and then not go too far above that. And so, and an answer right now, based on initiative 1351, we're 700 over capacity based on those numbers, and we're adding about 1,300 in capacity. We include the high school, which will be an additional 600 students capacity there. When we passed our last bond, that's when I first started getting involved with the schools. And I was on the bond committee, and they projected their projection was so far below, but we had no idea, even as a community, as a committee, that we were going to grow that much. Since then, we kind of look at births here at the hospital, and we can see some trends from births at the hospital to kindergarten class 6 years later. So we can be in the ballpark now based on that. But what we can't predict is who's going to move in the middle grades from kindergarten through 12th grade. People who will move in and bring in children of that age. And so that's the unpredictable part. So, like I said, we have until 7 o'clock before our meeting starts, so I'd like to open it up informally to some questions. So we'll just kind of pass the mic around.
I'm sorry, before we go to that question, can we go to the very last slide to show Mr. Colleen a little bit better? The orange bar is the first sale of the bond that they were talking about, and the teal, light blue, whatever color you want to call that, is the second bond. And then the dates. That last number is 2036 as an estimate projection. Does that make it look better?
Okay.
I hope that answers a little bit clearer. Sometimes it's better to see it in that form than. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so
Yeah, I'm David Leatherman, and I'd just like to know, with the projections you've given, when would you ever be able to build a new high school? You're on a site now that's in the wrong spot, and it's inadequate. It's a 1950s campus. It takes 40 acres basically to build a high school. You've got the space. I just can't see the practicality of spending a bunch of money on that site when you've got a site sitting out there that is basically waiting for a high school and sports facilities. And I just soon see that happen. I am totally opposed to the way that this is all happening. And well, I'll just let you know that it's going to be the first time I've ever voted against anything in schools, period. And it's because of that fact. I've lived in 3 districts where they've had high schools in the center of town. They get them out. I worked in a school district that had a high school in the center of town. They get them out. They don't belong in the center of town, and they need to be large. I mean, like I say, it takes 40 acres basically to build a high school. So anyway, that's my comment. And there again, if you go along with what you've got, when do you think you'd ever be able to build a high school?
great questions, and I think that we have answers to them. I wanted to ask any board members who would want to take that on.
Well, just as a quick answer to a part of the question, why we went with this recommendation was based on input from the community. And as with any situation, with any dialogue, getting the right answer to everyone is virtually impossible. But what we wanted to do as a board is be as transparent as possible and be as in having everybody, as many people involved to help us make this decision as we could. And there was several meetings throughout the summer. The fact that we started streaming our meetings, trying to get more people involved, more people to bring their ideas. And I think the idea you expressed isn't the only time we've heard that. But the overwhelming was the other. The needs that came from those meetings is what this bond or the scope of it is entailing. We've heard that, like I said, on more than one occasion, but the majority or the consensus of our citizens are what helped, or why we lean towards what we're doing.
I do know that when it came down, I actually, when we started the facilities committee, when the district did, I as a board member, fully expected a high school is where we were going. But when they ran all the numbers, I know when they came down to the end of the day, if we didn't do anything today, the earliest we could build a high school with not building any structures is 2028 with bond debt capacity today. And so I don't know the answer of when we have another opportunity, but I know the answer of we've got to go, because of debt capacity, we've got to go 10 years from now with overcrowding before we can even think about being able to afford to build a high school, if that makes sense. And which is obviously just because of the numbers and the match and all that, the way all that all works out. But 2028 was the number. If this bond didn't pass and the community said we're not doing anything until we can build a new high school, 2028 is that number, if that helps. According to, unless the community grows faster than projections and the tax base does.
And then my understanding was that didn't even include something to deal with the K through 5 overcrowding and the 6 through 8. Now, once a new high school would be built, then you'd have a campus open up, the current high school, but then there's money that has to go into that. There was a lot of discussions about what would the current high school make? What could you build there? It's not really a good middle school campus, is what I would hear input from people. So there was some questions about what would that cost to actually make that campus a usable facility for other grade levels too.
It can for sure be done. That's just what the district community members were telling us. It's not that you could make it into anything.
I understand what you guys are, but it just doesn't make sense to me. And I'd be more willing to vote for spend more money on a high school than I am to go through the situation. And I pay my fair share of taxes in this county.
So just a question, because I'm curious, now you would say too it's worth waiting the 10 years to get the high school if you had to wait?
No, you still have overcrowding. Why 10 years? Why
So,
10 years?
From my understanding of it,
You're asking for money now. Why couldn't it go into a high school?
well, Brian might
It's
correct me
$100
on
million
this.
to build a high school instead of 60. It cost $100 million to build a high school. So the numbers are different to begin with. Our sister city, that's just a normal, 100 is the low end. The Moses Lakes High School they're maybe going to build here one of these days is more than that. It's 110 or 111, I believe. But and there's no match because we do not have unhoused high school students from their projections right now, and so there's no match. The community has to pay for all of it today, the full $100 million, if we pass the bond, and we don't have the debt capacity to borrow that much is the issue.
And you may understand debt capacity, but for those who don't, I'll try to simplify it. Brian can correct me if I'm wrong, but we can ask our taxpayers on a bond for 5% of the assessed value of the property within our district boundaries. So if we have a $100 million worth of property, we can ask the community for $5 million. And it doesn't matter if the community said, no, we'll pay more. We can't ask for that to be taken from their taxes. And so that's our limitations on that. And part of this was structured to try to fit into the current debt capacity and what we project the debt capacity to be based on our historical growth of property values in our district as well. So when I first started with this, we started a facility committee 2 years ago almost, and overwhelmingly people liked the idea of the new high school, and I really thought, like Tony, that's the way it was going to go. But then when you started to look at, we kind of had a phasing idea, and essentially we were told by construction consultants that just it wasn't feasible. The idea we had wasn't a bad idea; it just really wasn't feasible and practical, and so that was part of the reason that didn't look like it was going to happen.
A little bit more of that state information stuff that we're constrained by. The state gives money according to K-8 unhoused students, and then it has money according to 9-12 unhoused students. And because of our current unhoused students of 9-12 was much smaller than the K-8, it made more sense to try to accommodate the maximum amount of students, which was the K-8, until basically those K-8 students then went to the high school and then were unhoused at the high school and had a different version of. So we're almost double dipping some of those students? Those state rules?
Are there any other questions that anyone has? All right, Bob?
Just as a point of information, Doctor, I just left a dinner over at the Christian church, and there was quite a bit of misconception on what the bond entailed. In fact, one person said, well, they're not going to build the elementary and the middle school out on Lee Road. I said, what are you talking about? Anyway, there's still a lot of misconception about the bond issue itself. My question to the boards is two. Number one, Adams County has a population of little under 18,000 people. I know the boundaries of the Othello School District, and Moses Lake has a population that exceeds the whole population of Adams County. My question number one is the tax base here to support $67 million? Number two, if this is built, will the McCleary decision by the state Supreme Court cover the cost of the teachers that are required to fill the schools?
Great questions. Any board members like to answer that? How about you, Ken? Put you on the spot. And if you don't know, that's okay. I mean, Ken and Jen both just got on the board, so they're still learning. It's a big learning curve, I know.
We're still learning on the McCleary decision. In fact, that's one of the things that the state legislator, it's supposed to be one of their main issues coming back up on their 60-day session.
If the court is required to be done by the fall.
They were ordered to still, there's $1 billion that they're still, the state still has to figure out how to fund it to finish, to pay for administrators and teachers. What was your first question again?
First question
Was
is, given the population, first question is the population of the school district, is the tax base here able to cover the $67 million?
Understanding how the assessed evaluations, and that's why the bond is kind of broken up in two different sales. For the first, the bond capacity, the first sale is almost $40 million. And as the assessed valuations go up in the county, that's when we could go out for the second sale of the bonds, which is projected in another 4 years. So the sales go as the assessed valuations go up in the county.
If enough taxpayers are okay with making an investment in the bond, because I heard that phrase at one of our meetings and I liked it. If enough taxpayers are okay with making an investment instead of paying more taxes, which is what it looks like, if we invest in the Othello School District, if we invest in Othello, I believe the tax base can uphold this bond.
Well, and keep in mind, Bob, that the state kind of determines also if a community can afford it by setting that 5% cap. So in a poor community that the value of the land isn't much, they're just not going to be able to borrow as much money. And so we can only borrow up to that 5% cap. And when you look at the state, we're considered a poor district in land value because while our farmland gets very high prices when they're sold, it doesn't compare to an acre in Bellevue, right? And so Bellevue they're going to get higher, their 5% is going to be a lot higher number than ours. That second question you asked.
That's the rationale for where that state funding comes from, is to help kick in to help poor property areas be able to afford schools. And so really, you say where's that money coming from the state? It's coming from other property taxes and property-rich districts that are helping to fund schools in Othello. So that 15 million that comes is because we are a poverty property district. And so that's, not every district gets that. If Bellevue is passing a bond, they're not going to get 15 or 20 or 30 million dollars kicked in from the state because they're a property-rich district, if that makes sense. So the 5% is, I'm sure by their calculations, that any community can afford to pay the 5%. From my view, the difficulty comes is as a homeowner, I believe I could pay it. It's more difficult when you start talking about businesses and can a business still stay in operation and pay this extra investment? And that's a harder one to answer. I don't know the answer because we live in a community where the revenues that a lot of our businesses make are dependent on factors that are out of everyone's control. So some years I'm sure they can pay it, not a problem. Other years it's going to be difficult in the ag community for sure.
To also piggyback on your second question and what Ken said, the salaries of teachers are paid by the state. And part of McCleary was they saw that local taxes were supplementing teacher and staff salaries, and they were saying no longer can that happen. The state needs to pay the full amount of a teacher's salary. And so if we hire a teacher, I mean, if we hire more teachers than the state says we need, because we say, hey, we want 10 kids in every classroom, they're not going to pay for all that. But if we hire the teachers that they say you need based on the initiative 1351, they will pay the salary. There's certain things that we have to pay as a district locally, but the majority of it does get paid by the state. I hope that answers that question, that second part of your question.
So, is this on? Yeah. So what I'm hearing is there's going to be 2 bond issues or bought. Will we be voting the second time, or is this just for both bonds? Is this the entire 61?
Yeah, so it's going to be one vote for this, but we don't have, so the 61 million will be voted on in February. We don't have a debt capacity of 61 million though today. And actually it would have to be more than that because we have some debt from our previous bond. And that's why the bond will be sold in 2 phases. We'll sell enough at first that we have the debt capacity for, and then we'll have to wait until we have the debt capacity to sell the other bonds. The community will approve it or not, but if they approve it, then they're just saying, yeah, we're okay with building that. We're held by a different standard as far as when we can get that money. The state determines when we get the money, and that all depends on assessed values of our property.
So Mike, you're basically doing about the income, right? The second set of bonds, you're doing on the if-come.
Yep, absolutely.
You know, so it could be, instead of 4 years, it could be 6 years, it could be 8 years. I mean, depending on what happens to the economy, lots of things.
Absolutely. That's the truth. I won't dispute that. Yep. And that's the only thing we can do is look forward to look at history and then look at the historical changes in our values and then moving forward. Or we wait and then go with another bond request to the community. And I believe that was another thing we had asked, should we separate these out? And the answers back from the community was, do it in one bond. Give us one shot at approving this or not. And so we as a board have been really looking for our community to help guide us in this best we can. And I don't think everyone sitting on this board will say that this was our first choice for sure. But we're trying to listen to what the community wanted on this.
So are you prepared to cut things if the bonding capacity isn't there? Is that an option?
As far as cut what specifically?
Well, part of your project. I mean, like I say, it's all on, the second set is on the if-come.
Right.
I mean, I agree that the probability is there, but we don't know what 4 years is going to give us.
So the second phase is the high school remodel. And so the question would be is when the high school remodel can start. It may not start till later, but we're going to have overcrowding one way or the other. I think is the answer to your question. But the new facility that is going to be built first, and then the high school remodel second. And so we're going to be able to make the high school big enough to house more students, but it's not an all or nothing at the high school. There's still room to have students there. And worst case scenario, there's other alternatives you could do temporarily. You can bring in portables and other things, which Othello's done in the past if we have to make room for kids.
Any other questions? They're all great questions so far. We appreciate them. Go ahead, Eleanor.
Thank you. That 15 million that you guys keep talking about, is that a guarantee?
So no, that's not a guarantee because there is no capital budget that's been approved.
That's right.
Again, that's based on historical data, and so there isn't a guarantee. If things change with the value of our property, like this gentleman mentioned, if state match changed, we would have to definitely look at, okay, what are we going to do now? Because we still can build facilities, but we can't build the facilities that we originally planned, obviously. And I guess it would be like, if one of us was looking to buy a house and something significantly changed in our job and our pay changed, we wouldn't be able to buy the house we were planning on buying, right? But we still may need a home. And so we'd end up getting a home and we'd have to make do with that until things changed.
Okay, because the public at large, you guys keep saying that 15, and I said, it's not a guarantee. I mean, I talked to the governor. I talked to Schessler. There is no guarantee. So if, Brian, if we went right now with what we would go out and tax without that, can you give me that rate, what they would pay?
Well, the rate would stay the same, Eleanor, because we're only approving 61 million, not the extra 15. The extra 15 comes from the state. It has nothing to do with that tax rate. So the tax rate would be the same. What would change is what we can build. We would not be able to build the same structure with the 61 million without the extra 15 than we can with it. But it doesn't change the local tax rate.
Okay, and the other thing is, I'm very well known for doing research, and Mr. Fuller here talked about what we could afford. I do know out of the 39 counties in the state of Washington, and I was floored when I looked at it, that we were 39. We did not used to be last in per tax or per income, and so that, can we really afford this? And we might have to scale back. I'm a conservative, and so it is out there, and so I think you guys should consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone want to add anything or comments on that, add to what Tony had said? Anyone on the board? Okay. Is there any other questions or comments? Yeah.
I'm grateful to hear some of the discussion. As I've looked at the numbers and been to every meeting, the overcrowding issues start with the bottom grades. And so there was quite a discussion, do we start top down or bottom up? And due to the overcrowding in the different middle school and in all of the K through 6, or anyway, all through the elementaries, a bottom-up approach seemed the best. One other comment from Mr. Leatherberry. Sorry, I didn't get your name right. Sorry. But I thoroughly enjoy, and I think the high school in the center of the town is a benefit to the community and the business in the town. When anything happens at the high school, everybody comes in through the town and sees the different shops, the businesses, the restaurants, etc. And school lunch period, we have tons of high schoolers going to businesses for lunch as well, and helping out growing the economy. I believe that the high school in the center of the town is very appropriate, and I support these measures, although I would rather have a brand new high school. I'd rather have a separate, completely separate elementary from a completely separate middle school. However, I think with our debt capacity that this is the best solution for the next 10, 15, 20 years. There's no other possibility to achieve housing all of our students in all of the different levels of education. There's no, I haven't seen a proposal that comes anywhere close to satisfying the housing needs as this does.
Thank you for your comment. Who else would like to make a comment or ask a question? We have another 15 minutes.
$15 million from the state is that number isn't it distributed on a I mean, if there's 25 districts that want to build high schools and anyway, the need factor out there, and then they chop it up, right?
Right.
So the chances are, I mean, this is a best guess. So it could be more, it could be less, depending on what demand is, what timber prices are, and some of those kinds of things.
So I'll take a shot at this, and Jen might want to jump in and help me out with it. I don't think timber prices matter because I believe there is a fund that it's already in.
It's DNR. DNR, I lived in a district that had 500 acres of timber ground. That's the only thing that can be, if it's public-owned ground, that's the only thing, capital projects, period.
Right, but I'm saying what I meant by that, the price of timber I don't think drives the price that a district will get, and I'll explain.
It's the amount of money that comes into the state.
That's how much
through
is
those
in the-
state
is in the
lands.
pool.
That's all I'm
Gotcha, okay.
equating that
So-
to, is the fact that it's revenue for schools.
Gotcha.
Right.
So when you looked at our numbers here, as far as how many students were under capacity, that's based on students per classroom. When the state determines what your state match is, they just say, okay, this kindergartner needs this much square footage. And based on that and how many students you have in kindergarten, and then there's a little bit more for different grade levels, they determine, based on your population of students, you need this many square feet of facilities. And if you need 200,000, you have 180,000, they say you are 20,000 unhoused, or they'll actually convert that to students. This many students are unhoused, they call it. And then that's how they determine what your state match will be, what you qualify for in that. And now, it's different from K-8, and they separate that. 9, 12, and K-8 are separated. Right, what they're talking about now, and you talk about who gets it, Eleanor hit the nail on the head. Because we're a poor district, we are one of the top, fortunately, I guess, in that area, we're one of the top priorities. And so we've been fortunate to be able to get that state match in the past because we're high on the list. Another thing they're considering, we don't know what the capital budget will be for sure, just as Eleanor stated, but one of the things they've talked about is even increasing that square footage per student. And so potentially that 15, we may not get the 15, but we may get 20. I mean, I don't know what it's going to be. And so it is speculation. I think historically, I don't believe we're going to go forward without a capital budget. That is my personal opinion. They're going to figure it out, what it's going to mean, and in the end, what dollar amount it's going to be for us. We don't know. Does that answer what you were asking about the priority and if we'll get it?
Right.
Okay.
I mean, it's not a number that's the state's given you and said that this is what you're getting.
This is based on what we knew earlier in the year. If it was to happen right then, I think that's what we got these numbers from. Jen, is there anything you can add to that? Or
Ditto.
All right. Did we have one over here? Yeah.
It has to be really close. Okay. Oh, there we go. I just was wondering, since we don't have a design yet, is some of the, I don't know what you call it, tweaking? Is that part of the design phase? Trying to, like, figure out the bits and pieces, what we can build, what we can't build, you know what I mean?
Right. So part of it was we didn't want to spend money and make a design and then not get that right amount of money and go, oh, well, all that money we spent on design, throw that out the window, because that doesn't work. We didn't want to spend any of that money until we knew the exact details. So that was part of why there's no design. There's no blueprint to look at, to go, yes, I approve this, but take that out. None of that money needed to be spent beforehand. So that does add a little bit of time to be able to build, but then we have a lot more solid numbers in the reality of hopefully capital state budget, what we're really getting, those kinds of things. So then we're talking more concrete instead of, well, here's our dream. That's kind of where we're working at from now. Right. Then we can build it out from there.
Just quickly, that brings up one concern I've heard in town from more than one naysayer, is the misconception, what you just said, the misconception that a significant amount of money has already been spent by the school district in designing the project. And it's, like I say, that's a misconception that's out there, that they're throwing up their hands, some of these people saying, shame on them. You know, how many thousands of dollars have they already spent just with the proposal and with designing the architecture of the project?
Can you go to that slide? Number 4? Nope. There we go. That's the extent of the design so far. And then go to the middle school. There we go. That's the other part of the design. And it even included an athletic complex at that time. And now we have to say, just cross that out. We're not doing that. That's the extent of the design that's been spent. Other than informing people about everything that are on all these slides, to my knowledge, that's what's been spent.
I just hope there's a whole bunch of people on Facebook Live who maybe are finding out what
Right.
really is going on.
That's how designed we are.
I don't know if they'd appreciate that comment, Rod.
The school district, about, 3 years ago, we passed money to improve most of the schools here in town. That was 3 years ago. Now we're coming up here and wanting more money to play catch up with the rising increase of the school student population. You're wanting a high school out of town in 3 more years. I know you don't have a crystal ball. One of the questions that comes up at coffee and comes up at dinners and whatnot is 3 years ago we had a bond for improving the schools, and now we want more money. In another 3 years, is there going, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but people are saying, are we going to have to pay again?
The only correction I would make there is it's hard to believe, but it was 10 years ago when that bond was passed. It was 10 years ago. It's hard to, it's before I only know that because it was before I got on the school board. And it was 2008, I believe, is when that bond passed. It might have been 2007 even.
It was the beginning of 2008.
But, so that is a concern. And as a board member and a community member, I would say that we're going to need more facilities down the road. There's no question. There's going to be another bond at some point. Unless Othello completely changes, I mean, who knows? Unless the growth pattern completely changes and everybody leaves, we're going to need more room for schools. I hope that doesn't happen because I kind of enjoy Othello. I want to stay here.
I have to correct myself. I actually think it was 2007 now. So it's been 11 years this February since the bond was passed.
But I hope that perception, it does feel like it hasn't been very long ago, but it has been a while.
Brian?
I'm sorry, the one with the... So, sir, if you look at this, this is our best projection here. You'll notice that after the 2018 bond, what is the trend? What is the trend here? It stays the same, exactly. We aim, provided this bond passes, we aim for the local tax level to stay the same. Not to go up, not to go down, to stay level. These are our best projections right here. I will also just add a comment to a prior question. According to our best projections, if this bond passes, when construction has ended in the year 2023, we will have capacity for every student in this district through the year 2028 without the use of a single portable classroom. I'll state that again. After construction is complete, we will have full capacity for every student in the Othello School District through the year 2028. That's 5 years following the second phase of construction without the use of a single portable classroom. And our projected tax rates are the same. Unfortunately, if we do not add more buildings, that is really the only choice. So we do not like them either. We want to get away from them. But this is our best projection. I've run into that question a lot. Are they going to come back? Are they going to ask for another whatever in this year? This is the best projection to date. We want it to level out.
So it looks like we have about 5 minutes left. Do we have any other questions? Yep.
I'm one that agrees the high school is in a prime spot right now. And as such, I do not believe we should be putting an auditorium and another gymnasium on that property. I'm all about easing the overcrowding in the classrooms, and in my mind, it does not include an auditorium and a gym. When you put a 1,500-seat auditorium in, the city will require so much parking spot. And so you're going to turn that prime real estate in the middle of town for a high school into an auditorium and a parking lot. And on your designs, I don't see any space for a bus loop, which you're currently utilizing that bus loop now. So I don't know. You'll have to plan that. And then when you come to add additional classrooms at that facility, you're going to be tapped out. It's going to be done. So the reason I heard we need a new gym is because in the current gym, when they have an assembly, there's not enough room for kids. Well, it's a lot cheaper to buy some of these chairs like this and set them up for assemblies than build a new gym. So I'm kind of on the bubble on this bond with including what I consider stuff that's not needed, including an auditorium and a new gym.
Thank you. I have a question, just in response to that. Right now, with we have close to, and I'm rounding, close to 1,000 students at the high school, close to 1,000 students at the middle school, with 2 gyms to be able to carry the PE activities and sports. If you increase the student body to a capacity of 1,500, what would you do with the need for PE facilities in that situation? If you didn't have another gym, I'm just curious what your
I'm not
would you
sure
say?
how many two-way schools at this point have 3 gyms. That's a pretty nice feature to me. And keep in mind that every Friday night when we have basketball games at the high school, there's 3 other really nice gyms in town that are empty. So it's unfortunate you have to go off-site, but that, seeing the economics of it, that might be the reality, in my opinion.
I would say that there might not be that many 2A schools with 3 gyms, but I don't think there's any 2A schools with 1,500 students either, though. I do believe once we hit 1,500, we'd be a 3A school. So we would be likely in a different classification then. And I travel around for AAU basketball, and I would say there's plenty of 3A schools that have 3 and even more, 4 gyms that I've seen. The Kennewick schools have a lot of gyms, and not that we have to be like that. I'm just trying to, when I look at this, I try to be practical too, and I think we don't need to get things that we don't need. One of the big pushes 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, when we were talking originally about the facilities, and we were talking about this new high school, one of the concerns about not having something like an auditorium was they were looking at that as classroom space. That would be where they'd be having band and choir and those classrooms, and basically saying that what we have now is incredibly insufficient. And I just have to go off with what we're hearing from the teachers that give that. So I would have an issue probably with an auditorium that only sits there and doesn't get used unless there's a performance as well. And I would expect that it would be used on a regular basis, and I think it would be for educational purposes too. That's a really good point, though, about the parking and the requirements, because they definitely have included some parking in that design, but whether or not it's adequate, I doubt they've looked into it that deeply, because that's when you go into design process and you've already actually got the architects involved. Any other questions? Yeah.
I think we need to address the bus loop question part of that. The bus loop at the high school is not used in the same format that it had been used in the past. And if you see the amount of parking at the high school, there's not that many students at the high school. Because I live in town, I don't really have experience with buses. My kids don't ride buses. I'm the mom bus. So, but there's not a lot of students at the high school riding buses, and the bus loop concept that had been there in the past is not the amount of space that is needed now. And the bus garage is not there either. So the busing part of that question, I think, is not in the same capacity it has been in 2 or 3 years ago.
Someday when we have it, maybe we should have lunch. I actually spent an hour following buses around, so I'm an expert on the buses. And 14 of them. See where they go?
That's a little predatory.
Yeah, it was a little creepy, but 14 of them, I live by Hiawatha, 14 of them go by my house, which just amazes me. And they go to each school. Kids are on the bus for over an hour before they even leave town. They have to stand outside in the cold for 15 minutes before the second shift of buses even rolls up. So, and they all ended up at the high school anyway, which is what we did a few years ago. So
You are right in front of Hiawatha and do see all of those Hiawatha buses come right past you. And yes, you do see that there is a busing problem. We don't have enough bus drivers. We have discussed that many times. We have a busing problem in the district. We don't have enough bus drivers.
At least a dozen of them show up in the high school bus loop.
A dozen students?
School buses.
Okay.
So it is utilized currently.
I'm just saying not at the same capacity as a couple. It wasn't, no longer is it take every student from every school, go to the high school, then rearrange all of the buses and every student on every bus, and then go back to their own homes. That's what I'm trying to say, that no longer is that method being used. That's where I was trying to, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear there.
No, I understand what you're saying, but I'm not saying that system ought to be, to me, that was logistically brilliant what they used to do. Now they have 14 buses to go by my house. A 60-person bus loops into Wahidas, picks up one student, and goes to all the other schools. It's amazing if you're familiar with what the buses are doing right now. It's just, I don't know what it is actually, but I don't see how it works or that it's a good plan.
Thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I recently heard one of your representatives say that were this bond measure to pass, there will be quite an extended period of getting or requesting input from the community as to the details of construction. And so if that's a comfort to anybody, that some of these things like the question of parking space, the bus loop, building, configuration, all the rest of it, I understand that the community, once the bond to pass, it's not like the community is excluded out of the loop at that point. There will be opportunity and welcome for community input as to details of construction.
That is true, Rod. Thank you for that. So we will need to start our regular meeting now. So I just want to end with this because someone had recently asked me, what do our taxes compare to taxes around us? And I meant to ask Dr. Hurst to get that information, and I'm sure we will going forward. But I just pulled up because I was curious because I know that Pasco just had a bond initiative this last year. And 2018, local taxes in the Pasco School District will be, looks like about $7.10. And so if you look at ours, our projections are to go $5. Now, we're not Pasco, and I get that, but just as a comparison to another, what I would say, probably high poverty school district as well, we're trying to keep in mind we don't want to be the highest tax school district, and so we do our best to try to make sure we're keeping that as low as we can and still meet the needs. But thank you all for coming, and I think the ballots are coming out this week, I believe. Is that correct? Yes. Oh, okay, never mind. I'm way early. It's a couple weeks still. So
You are all welcome to stay for the rest of the board meeting. It just continues on, gets even more exciting from here. So,
so we'll take just a 5-minute recess, and then we'll come back into our regular board meeting. Thank you all. So we're going to move on to student representative reports. Do we have some reports from our student reps? I don't have kind of a curve to this now, so I think you guys are down there, but I can't see you. All right. Speak loudly.
Okay, so the first thing I want to report on is now that break is over, I want to start working on Project Bridges. And so I'm going to try to get in contact with all the schools just so that they're prepared and they know what's going to come up. I know obviously it's still a long time out. It doesn't happen until around May. But I kind of want to start that a little earlier. I want to try to get in contact with Kiara just to make sure that everything that she did last year, we incorporate that somehow and that I fully understand everything before I begin. And if you guys have any requests or recommendations for that process, please let me know. And I'm going to teach Isabel all the tricks of the trade so she knows for next year, We had a senior class meeting today during our Husky Futures period, and during that, Dr. Hurst came and actually talked about the bond, and we all learned about voting and all that, and I think that really opened the eyes, at least the seniors, that they're able to participate in some of this and realize that we are going to become adults, so I think that was really helpful. The first and only Lady Husky wrestling match is tomorrow at 6. It is senior night, so I'm asking her, please be in attendance or at least try because it's the only one that they have. And otherwise, we're just really getting ready for finals at the high school and getting everything set up. Isabel.
I don't really have too much to report on. I just need to correct what I said last board meeting. It's kind of weird not seeing you guys, but it's okay. I said that our reader board was up, and I done goofed, and I messed up. We don't have a reader board up yet, but we did get a ATV, and it's just all of our announcements to like the students and stuff. So, yeah.
It was a reader board. It was just not an outdoor reader board.
It was just our reader board. It wasn't like the big reader board. Yeah. So
I was afraid you just totally made that whole story up, so I'm glad to hear you have it inside.
No, I just yeah, so that's all I have.
All right. Thank you both. So we'll move on to board member reports, and we have a few items here. The first one, Jen, I don't know if there's any new legislative information. We have something. All right.
Oh, shoot. Yes. Oh, I wasn't prepared, sorry. Have to accept the password and log in and, oh, shoot. Oh, it's not on this one. It's on this one. Eventually, I'll get to the legislative report email. Here we go. Okay. On Tuesday, the 9th, at 3:30, the House Capital Budget Committee has scheduled both the capital budget and the associated bond bill for executive session. That's exciting. Well, it would be nice to have a capital budget. It's not a public meeting, though. The bills will be voted out of session, and then someone's comment to me was, with both the Senate and the House controlled by the Democrats, they could move the capital budget bill on a strict party line vote, but the bond bill must accompany the capital budget bill, as it deals with the bonding mechanism to pay for the capital budget. Passage of the bond bill requires a 60% approval rate in both chambers. They have not come to an agreement on the Hearst decision water rights issue, but there is a hearing on that tomorrow. But the opinion was that they're moving the capital budget bills so that when the Hearst decision comes to resolution, the capital budgets are just going to be great. Got that? Check. Now let's vote on this. So hopefully that will make it so that we know what our 15 million number truly is, or at least give us something better for the whole state and the district as well.
Great. Thank you, Jen. All right, so the next item I had brought up at the last board meeting, just a question regarding our agenda verbiage in board docs in comparison to our verbiage in GP8, and asked the board to look at that and see if there was a feeling that maybe we go with using just the verbiage in our policy, or changing our policy to match the verbiage in our board docs, or maybe somewhere in between. And so I wanted to, hopefully you guys have got an opinion on that you'd like to share with me. It was just for consistency, because in the policy the verbiage is different. The order is the same. So what do you think, Mike?
I like the way, what is being used right now?
So right now, board docs, some of the verbiage is the same, but not necessarily all of it, as far as in comparison to GP8.
I like what is on board docs.
Okay. So how about you, Jen?
I can't answer. I didn't really look that up well enough to give an opinion.
Okay. Ken?
So what's really the difference from what you're doing now and according to GP8? Because
So-
you look at it and it looks exactly like what we're
Yeah,
doing.
we're doing the same thing. This is strictly about the verbiage, the words that are used. So in GP8, let me bring up an example. I'm going to have to go back and forth on this, I think.
Section D.
Can you help me on that, Tony? Are you
Monitoring
looking at it?
reports from superintendent and executive.
My memory is it has to do with Section D, where the monitoring report sections are. Is my memory of when that came up last time.
There you go. So, well, yeah, I think that was the big part. But it was really just whether or not we want to use the exact same verbiage. And we could do either one. We could do what Mike said, just go with what the board doc says, and then make a recommendation to modify the policy, or follow the policy and change board docs. But I think we should be consistent, I think was my comment. Let's be consistent one way or the other.
My personal view would be that we follow our policy until the time the policy changes. So if a board member rewrites the policy to match these discrepancies, then that's fine. But until then, my feeling is the policy is already passed.
Okay.
I agree. We should be following policy.
Okay.
We need to change it. Then we
And so we can all get what we want here. Mike, all you have to do is submit a policy recommended change with that, and then see what the board feels about that. So for the next board meeting, we'll just make sure that our verbiage matches the policy at that time. Okay, thank you for that input. Now, the next item, this was just kind of I said I was going to bring up the IPGA conference at the next board meeting, and then we'd kind of put that to bed for a little while. Has anyone looked at that and decided if that's something they'd like to attend?
I've looked at that, and I don't think that that is really all that worthwhile at this point. I tried to look up student stuff to see if there was even anything there that applied to them, and I couldn't find anything that was worth it at this point, that really even applied to the students going also.
So I will say that this conference is strictly about learning policy governance, and so there won't be anything specifically for students other than they would get the benefit of seeing the whole purpose of how policy governance works. So there won't be like any breakout sessions for students because school districts are just a small portion of who attends this.
Right. There was a conversation, though, about the way they had worded something in there, and I wondered if that meant could it somehow apply to them, but for me, I don't think that at this time this is worthwhile or the students.
Okay.
For me.
Ken, did you give it any thought to it? Is that something you're interested in?
I'd love to learn more about the policy governance a lot more, but unfortunately this time is right in the middle of my vacation time and family reunion, so there's no way I could actually attend.
Tony, what are your thoughts for this year?
I think I said it at the last board meeting. I can't attend it this year.
That's right.
But I did find significant value in it last year, and I think I will attend again at some point in the future, but I can't this year.
Mike, what are your thoughts for this year? Okay. So I think it's safe to say that no one will be going to the IPGA conference. So, okay, this was a comment that was brought up. I think Tony brought this up to me. Just wanted to have a discussion about the July and December board meetings. So currently our calendar has one board meeting in July. It's the fourth Monday of July. We don't want to have one the first Monday of July. And then our second meeting in December has been a noon meeting. And so I'm just going to hand that off to Tony about what his feelings are going forward, what he'd like to see.
Yeah, really my comment, and it'd be something that I think maybe we'll discuss, that I'll bring up at the retreat when we develop our next calendar. The reason why, as far as I know as a board member, why we only have one meeting in July and the short meeting in December is because that's the way we've always done it since I've been on the board, because July is a vacation. But I want the board to consider that I believe July is an important planning time for school board, for us as a board at this point, and the way that the board's going with policy governance, and I want the board to consider just a fresh look of should we be meeting twice in July, and it'll be a good discussion, a good retreat discussion, I think. But I just want to get it out there ahead of time. It's just, for me, it's just one of those things. You know, if you ask me why we only meet once in July, I'd tell you I don't know. We've only met once in July before I was on the board. But I think there's plenty of board work to do. And for me as a board member, I don't like only meeting once in July because I feel like we end up behind as a board and what we want to get accomplished for the school year. I don't know what any other seasoned board members feel like, but I think it'd be a good discussion to be thinking about between now and whenever our retreat ends up being.
Okay. And how about the December?
The same thing. It just from my view, the reason why, I know the reason why we have that short board meeting in December is for payroll, but to me it doesn't make a lot of sense. And again, we can discuss it at the retreat. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me to have a noon meeting anytime, just because it's difficult when those of us that work, it's difficult to just have a noon meeting just to have a noon meeting.
Okay. So it would just be important for you to remind me to add that to the agenda for our board retreat this year. So, but that's
we could talk about it
sooner
as a board. I don't think we're talking about changing anything that's going to impact the next board meeting, and so. Yeah,
I think that we could wait for that. I don't see why we couldn't. And even if we decide to make a change to the calendar before July, we have the ability to do that. So, okay, thank you, Tony. The next one I have, SurveyMonkey results in Board Docs Library. And I'm going to have to remember
was a concern I had. I could help.
Oh,
you
that's
remember
right.
it.
Okay, so that's Tony again.
My concern is that we use SurveyMonkey as a board to help us to come to a consensus. And my concern is by putting the SurveyMonkey results themselves in the library for the public, is there could be confusion with the public over the SurveyMonkey says this, but the board decided this policy was Y after we had a discussion. And so I just am not sure the real reason to even have the SurveyMonkeys in our library, because they're not something that I personally as a board member would ever reflect back upon, because I look at what we actually decided as a policy, not the survey itself. I don't know why they got in there. I don't think the board directed anyone to put them in there necessarily. I'd be interested in the rest of the board's thoughts on it.
So you're saying there could be one specific comment and out of compliance that the rest of the board didn't agree with, and the board in general agreed it was in compliance, but then the public could read someone marked out of compliance and put a comment there and maybe perceive that was a board decision or board feeling. Okay. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So what's the rest of the board
To
feel?
hear what the rest of the board thinks on that. But.
Okay. Ken, what are your feelings? Keep it in the library, or just keep it with the agenda?
Yeah, I agree with the analogy on that, but I also believe in open government too.
Yep.
And it's in the agenda, yes, but if the public wants to go and research it too, and know, it's still there for them easily to find if they want to look at those. Believe it or not, there is some people that actually do. I mean, the numbers ain't great, but you might get one or two. But it's easy access for them. That's just how I feel on it. You know, still open government. And when we do it, we do create a public record, and all those public records should be open for the public.
Yeah, so, and I think I agree with both myself. I agree we should absolutely always keep it in as an attachment to our board docs, but I do feel like in the library, they should be very specific to monitoring documents, monitoring reports, and superintendent evaluations. Final decisions by the board, I think, in the library. Keep the individual attachments in the board docs agendas. That would be my feeling. So
it'd be just as simple as I just typed in on the board doc search, I just typed in the word survey, and it pulls up every attachment that's in every meeting that has the word survey in it. So it wouldn't be difficult. The public would have to know how to click on the button that says search, I suppose. But
and it sounds like the consensus of the board is to go with Tony's recommendation. Am I on that? Okay. So we'll just be removing that section from library. Okay, we'll move on to then, along the line of SurveyMonkey, though, I wanted to ask the question. I know it was brought up a couple meetings ago, I think, that the potential of including our student reps in our SurveyMonkeys, and I think the talk was that they would be included in our GP and BSR SurveyMonkeys, not EL and Ns. That was my memory. Was that what you guys remember? Since EL and Ns are evaluative to the superintendent, GPs and BSRs are evaluative to us as a board. They could give their feedback on how they think we're doing as a board. Is that what we had talked about? We could include them in SurveyMonkeys, but essentially in the end, only we five as a board can make those kind of decisions that are evaluative in nature with the superintendent. Am I correct in that assumption? Okay.
I agree.
So what does the board feel about starting our next SurveyMonkeys, which I think will be tomorrow, right? That we include the student reps for any GPs and BSR policies so they can give their opinions. I'm getting a lot of nods.
I would.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, I'd like
So
to hear the opinion.
the student reps, I think they like that idea, so they could be a little more involved in it. They might need a little mentorship on filling out those first couple. So I know you guys can contact your mentor if you have some questions. Okay. We clear there? Okay, great. And now we'll move on to the discussion regarding the detail of board meeting minutes. So this...
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep.
This will go back and probably go back a year, maybe two ago, because time flies. I think that I personally felt that our board meeting minutes should be more detailed. We didn't, this might have been before that, because we definitely weren't doing video, and we might not have even at the time been doing audio. And I felt like, this is the one piece of information where people can really read and see what our discussions were about. They need to be detailed. Now I feel like since we have video of our meetings, that maybe our board meeting minutes should be more general. This is just my personal opinion. Just saying there was a discussion on this topic, because what it does, for instance, sometimes I'll look at the meeting minutes and I'll say, well, it wasn't quite like that, maybe a little bit of a detail that needs to be changed, and so then I would have to have a conversation to make the change, whereas if we just keep it general, if someone says, I want to hear what that discussion was, they can always go to the video and listen to that specific discussion. That way, if there was maybe a mistake in the notes and we don't catch it, that the public doesn't say, well, that's what they decided, when that wasn't necessarily the decision. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? So this was just my feeling. It would actually, I think, make Talia's job a little bit easier if she could be more general. And we still have the ability for community to go right to the discussion itself.
My concern would be the ability to search later. It'd be my only concern. The more that's in the minutes, the easier it is for me as a board member and for the public to search for words and have it get you to the section you want to be. The smaller the meeting, I realize it's going to be all on the video, but there's no way to search the video to find what you were looking for. That's my only concern.
See what you're saying. I'm just trying to think of like an example of how a detail in a discussion would be searchable, that someone would search for rather than just the topic of the discussion itself.
Yeah, it depends on how vague you go. If you go too vague, then the problem is you're going to remember a certain thing that happened and be trying to search for that and try to remember what was before and what was after and where was it.
Okay.
But
what do you think, Ken?
Anyway. But I don't know, because it's been a long time since we've done it the other way, and so I haven't had to search in a condensed meeting we didn't have search capacity last time we had that issue, so it was even more difficult. We had to go through each envelope and open it up and look inside and see. It was much more difficult to find the past meetings before we went to board docs.
You're impossible.
There's a lot more going off of memory.
What do you think?
Believe it or not, before I took the spot, I went back to help prepare me and read the last year and a half of minutes. And some of them I felt weren't clear enough. It was hard to understand why you guys got to a certain decision. And that's why I like to see some of the details still stay in it. Because it is easier sometimes to go back if you have a particular date. Just go back and read the minutes. It takes just a couple minutes to pull it up, and you're done, instead of the video going back and trying to research all that and pull out the particular time and period in that. So.
Okay. Great. Thank you. What about you, Jen?
I don't know. Before I would have said, it doesn't need to be detailed, and now hearing these things, I'm not sure. So I don't know if I can see both perspectives.
All right. What about you, Mike? You might be the tiebreaker, or you might create the tie.
I would say less broad, more, I hate to say bulleted, just have them be bullets, but I happen to agree with you to where I don't believe the detail is going to be the determinant factor of how I got to the search or what I was searching for. If the topic is there, I think if it matters enough to whoever's researching it, they're going to take the time to find their answers.
Okay.
So I believe to simplify them, I don't know if that's the correct term or not. Not that we're looking to make Talia's life or job way more complicated, but I believe if we simplify them, I guess is my best description of what you're trying to say, I'd be for that.
So it sounds like kind of a 2 and 2, and maybe Jen, we need to.
Okay. Jen's going to have to think about it and decide.
You can think about it if you want.
So I guess the thing that I'm, because there's times on the meeting minutes that if you got to it and you could figure out where, then you could go to the video and find the exact time, and then if you wanted to listen to the exact conversation and all of those things. So I think in that case I would go a little more simplified, because you could, it gives you very specific references to the time in a video.
But I would just add to that not everyone has Facebook, and you just can't click and go to a video without a Facebook account.
We're going to now
not
have
quite
video
there
when you click on that meeting, the video is going to be accessible from Board Docs.
So are we embedding it somewhere else, or is it going to a Facebook link?
Well, it wouldn't go to Facebook. It goes to a YouTube link. It'll go to YouTube.
If it goes, yeah, as long as somebody has the technology to get to it, then.
Yeah.
If it's a YouTube link, it's going to be a lot easier than a Facebook link.
If they have a browser, would you say that they have the ability to get to YouTube, a YouTube link, for sure?
I would think so.
Okay.
I'm not a technology expert by any means, but
So
it makes me feel better if it's going to YouTube. I didn't know it was.
But it sounds like that they're leaning toward simplifying. But let's try this for a little while, and we can always go back and say, this isn't working out very well, or we might get some input from the public as well. One thing I would say is that I would ask, Talia, do you change the times based on what reality happens, or do you keep it based on what we thought was going to be? Because sometimes people get an hour and a half behind. But in order to make that accurate, you would actually have to update your times based on what really happened. So every time I go to B, you'd look at the time and note that. C, you did the same thing. Okay. I think we'd have to in order. I think Jen made a really good point there, but it would have to be really what happened rather than our estimate. Okay. Great. Thank you, everyone. We'll move on now to discussion of redundant district operating policies, and this I'll go to Tony again.
Yeah, the discussion really comes around to EL 19. District operating policies are we've delegated them to the superintendent. There's no question by policy. Where the question for me comes is most of the DOP 1000s are actually school board policies. They all have to do with the board. And so, and I'd be interested to hear Dr. Hurst's perspective on it as well. I get conflicted in saying, okay, it's Chris's responsibility to figure out all these DOP 1000s that really direct the board and how the board operates. But then he also is not, I'm trying to think of a good way to say it, but he is not the boss of the board. The public is. And so I get conflicted into, should the board really be going through the DOP 1000 series and taking out the ones that no longer apply because they're covered under governance, or should we be allowing the superintendent to do that? And in some ways, you're empowering the superintendent above what's intended, from my mind. But plus, we've been governance for 3.5 years now, and I've brought this up multiple times, and all these DOP 1000s are still there, and it drives me crazy.
Yeah, this has come up a couple times, and it may even come up when Jen and Ken, when you guys have come to some of our meetings when you were candidates. I don't know if you remember any discussions regarding the redundancy of GOP 1000s when compared to our GPs, really is what it's about, and even maybe the BSRs. So do you understand what Tony's getting at there? If our 1000 series, really, some of them say almost exactly what are said in our GPs, and it just seems redundant. And I think this was brought up first year and a half, probably 2 years ago, and so it hasn't been done yet, but.
So an example is the next item on there is the redistricting director operating policy that, from my view, the board decides if we're going to redistrict, not the superintendent, but we've delegated the policy to the superintendent. It doesn't necessarily make sense to me.
Really, I think when we delegated DOPs to superintendent policies, we should have at that time removed the 1000s and made them board policies. We didn't, so we have an opportunity to correct that now, is in my mind. How does the rest of the board feel about that?
So really,
I guess, do you feel there's a need for 1000 series policies?
My question really came down to, should we be taking the lead as a board and going through the 1000 series and making decisions, or do we want to delegate it like the policy says and have Chris tell us what we're supposed to be doing as a board?
I'm definitely against that part of it. That part, yes, I totally agree. I don't know about the other part. I can't answer that yet. But, right, we should be taking that responsibility ourselves as a board.
Our policies state that we are responsible for excellence in governance, right? What do you think, Ken?
I agree. The public vote us, and we are responsible to the voters, and I agree.
Okay, Mike? So, Tony, you had sent me kind of a list of ones that you thought really were just absolutely redundant with policies we already have. And what I want to delegate to you, could you meet with Chris about those that are absolute redundancies, and so that Chris can then take those out of his policies, if the board's okay with that? And then any other ones that you just feel we need to make policies for, then you could bring that to the board and say, okay, here's some that are there that aren't in our policies that maybe should be.
Sure, I can do that.
Okay, thank you. And so that kind of segues into the next one. When Tony had asked, he wanted to have a discussion regarding redistricting, there was no policy in our governance policies about redistricting. It's a district operating policy 1105, but it is it's a responsibility of ours as a board. And so I hopefully we'll never do this again, but I referenced a DP or DOP in our board discussions. And so that's why that's there. But Tony, you had something you want to talk about redistricting.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring that. I don't know if Ken and Jen were coming to board meetings that early, but the board about this time last year talked about redistricting and pursuing the basically what the law says is that as a school district we have the ability to have up to 2 at-large directors. We have to have 3 district boundary directors. Right now we have 4 district boundary directors and 1 at-large. And as a board, that board at the time had talked extensively about asking the voters to approve going to 2 at-large positions and 3 in-district or boundary positions. At the time, because we knew there was 2 new board members coming on, after a lot of discussion, the board at the time decided to delay making any decisions until the new board got. This is by my memory anyway, and the other 3 board members that were there can respond if my memory is not correct. But
no, that's how
my memory is we decided we'd wait and have the discussion another day. But I still, as one board member, believe that it'd be better for our community to have more at-large positions versus less, because it gives more community members the opportunity to serve on the board if they want to. And I think it's something that we should pursue. My memory is that we have to pass a resolution, and then it goes to the bond, and it goes to the voter to approve in the fall. But and my memory is, as a board, we have to have the resolution done by June or something like that. But my intention was to start the discussion and get the current board's feelings on if they think that's a good idea to have 2 at-large positions instead of 1. And then I imagine the discussion from them would go to deciding which director position would be the best one to open up to at-large at this point when we redo the bound. Because obviously one director that's in a district would end up being at-large when we got done.
Does the board feel this will be another appropriate discussion for retreat, or would that be too long to wait?
Remind me when the retreat is?
Well, that was something we'll decide here
Month-ish?
soon, but typically it's in May.
Okay.
It'd be a pretty quick turnaround if you waited till then, because I believe, I don't know if anybody here actually knows the date, but I believe it's early June is when you have to have notified the county.
You might be right, but typically resolutions for a November election is in August, I thought. But June seems early, but maybe it's different for redistricting.
I think that maybe this resolution actually ends up being voted on at the earlier election.
Might be an August one, okay. Oh, especially if it affects the November election, right?
Because I'm just going back to last time we changed it. My memory was it was the earlier one is when we voted on it.
Yeah, my guess is that we probably could make the change at any potential election. We could have a special election for it, but to reduce cost to the district. And since this next year is a non-board member voting year, we might be able to do it in November. But if that's true, I mean, I would suggest this would be a good board retreat item as well to have this discussion. In the meantime, hopefully the board members ask their constituents, kind of get a feel for what they think would be a good idea. How does the board feel about that?
No, I agree. agree on that.
And then if we could get some verification about if we did go to a vote with that in November, how soon would we need to get the resolution in to the county? And maybe we'll make our decision off that, whether or not we do it in the retreat or beforehand. Does that sound good? Okay. Okay, so I think that's it for director discussions, unless there's something that someone has thought of in today's meeting that wasn't brought up. All right, I'm 18 minutes late, so I'm moving now. So we'll move on to required approvals. I will accept a motion to approve.
I would like to pull something out of the required approvals.
Can I make a motion first, Jen?
Oh,
Maybe this
sorry.
will help you. I'd like to move to approve item C1, required approvals, with the removal of item C1-4 to be tabled to a future meeting.
So I have a motion on the table to approve item item C1 with the removal of item C1-4, with that item being tabled to next board meeting.
I would like to also remove C1-5 for a discussion.
Okay.
Can I do that without seconding?
Well,
Can we?
that's it.
Oh, and I would like to make an amendment.
Well, no, we don't have to do that yet. We haven't had a
Okay.
second yet. So, but I want to make a reminder to the board that when you know you're going to pull something, approval of agenda is the right time to do that. We'll let it go today, but typically in the agenda approval, that's because you're changing the agenda. But what we need to do is then, we have a motion on the table, and there has been discussion. Everyone has heard what Director Stevenson has requested, so is there a second to Tony's motion, or will it die for lack?
Jen, is it something, do you feel like we need to approve it separate, or do you just want to have discussion on that item before we vote?
I think we need to have some clarification before we vote it.
So would you be okay with leaving it in there, and then after you ask your question and we have discussion, the board can always vote against the consent agenda and re-vote?
And we could have a second
concern.
motion to address that issue.
Yes, I think that would be okay, what you
Rather than
said.
pull it out and then rediscuss it.
Right.
Well done, Tony.
Okay.
So there is a motion on the table right now, as I mentioned. There's been some discussion. Based on that discussion, is there a second?
Second.
There's a second by, I'll say the motion's by Director Ashton, second by Director Garza. Now, there's some room for some more discussion, and I think that's where it would be appropriate for you to ask your question, Jen, for clarification.
On the school calendar B for 2018-2019, on the bottom, it says, let's see if I can find it now. Oh, no.
You get an error when I click on it?
All of us do. No?
Are we all
Again.
getting errors when we click on that right now?
Okay, so I think I can just explain it without, on the bottom of the school calendar, it says that there is, all of the underlined things are late starts, but there's no underlined dates. So just to verify, we're not having late starts for 2018-2019?
Okay, so Talia has an answer for that, I think.
So when I talked to
Hey,
Colette
Talia.
Simpson, she actually said,
In the future, can you not tell it to ask us to vote till we actually vote? Because now my screen's locked up.
okay. So when I talked to Colette Simpson, she said that we still do not know what late starts, what late start dates we are going to be doing because they still need to figure out the PLC dates. They might be changing in the future. So that is something that the OEA and the PSC will be coming together and deciding what late starts.
When is that?
She did not
planned?
clarify. She did not let me know when that was going to be. When that's going to be.
So do we have to approve this now then, if it's going to be changing anyways?
So that's Sandra.
Just so I understand, we're talking about changing when the school start time for those days, not if there's going to be school or not those days, right? I don't know about PLC days. Is that going to take a complete school day change a complete school day, or do they?
Sandra, I think, has the answer,
Sandra
she said.
maybe knows.
What was that question, Tony?
Well, the late start days, I have a good handle on. If the days we do or do not have late start, it's just, we're going to have school that day. It's just a matter of when it starts.
Correct,
So for
yes.
me, to approve the calendar, that doesn't change much. 'Cause
Right.
You're going to still have school that day. The PLC days I heard mentioned, I think that might actually change the school day around, right? Aren't the PLC days all day long?
No, I think
They're
that's
in the
late start.
morning.
That's the hour and a half
That's
late
the
start
late
is PLC, right?
start. Okay, sorry.
So
If
are
it's
we
just
being asked
changing
as a
the
board
time-
to approve the calendar based on the days that children will be attending school and days off? And the details about early releases and late starts, that's what's still under negotiations? Is that what I understand?
Correct. Late starts, I think, for the most part.
So when we approve this, I think that's what Jen's asking, are we going to have to then approve it again based on the determinations of those PLC days?
I don't believe, I actually don't have an answer for that. I wasn't aware that the PLC times were not on here already. I think Pete might have an answer.
To me, it would make sense that you would not have to do that again, because we're just approving the amount of school days during the school year and when they are, and it doesn't change the amount of school days.
Yeah, I think what's contributing to the confusion is that there was some legislation that came through that made reference to the number of PLC days that districts could access. And I believe our association is still unclear about how to move forward with that recommendation from the state, as similar to the capital fund project and those kinds of things. There's just some muddy waters. I think what they're looking for is approval of a start date and an end date, and what those vacations might look like in between for students and staff. And then the PLC times we could figure out moving forward.
The previous legislative rep apparently was not aware of these this PLC legislation, so I apologize. I don't remember reading about
I
that.
vaguely remember something about that at WASDA in
All right.
passing with somebody.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Jen?
Okay, so we're not going to have to reapprove because you're just going to add or not add
I
late
would-
starts or
I don't
something
believe
else.
I don't know if anyone can guarantee that,
Okay.
because it might be something we have to approve again. But I think sounds like what people want to know right now is, how do I plan my summer vacations? How can I plan my fall vacations next fall? And probably an hour and a half late start's not going to affect someone's plans for that kind of thing. Is
Okay,
that safe
right.
to say?
Yes, I would
Okay.
agree with that.
Okay, so any other discussion on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. I can't click to find the exact EL at the moment, but there's an EL that basically says that directs Dr. Hurst to make sure that the public is involved in every decision that affects them. And I just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything referencing that
And students?
that the public and the students were involved in this calendar, and I just wanted to make sure. I understand it, and I understand it's in our agreement with the OEA that they get to vote on A and B. I just wanted to be assured that the process of getting calendar A and calendar B included parent input and student input and stakeholder input.
Yes, and we have that EL before us whenever we're making those decisions for definitely big decisions that impact students and parents also. So we talk about that quite frequently.
So do you know specifically how the students were involved in this? Because I asked my daughter the other day, I said, so was there any surveys or anything you got? And she said she wasn't aware of any, but I do understand she's 16, and there might have been some.
So these two survey options came from Colette Simpson. So her process that she used to gather the input on those two surveys, we'll have to gain some clarification on. The two surveys that we sent out to the associations were the two options that Colette brought forth to the district
Yeah, and
office.
my question is not the survey. It's that, from my understanding of our policy, is that we want to have the stakeholders, the students, involved in helping to create calendar A and B, not necessarily vote on A and B, which one they want, because that's by contract, that's what the OEA gets to choose, and we approve what they choose. But I would hope that those people had input on creating the options for A and B, if that makes sense. If Colette just created option A and B all by herself and then had the OEA vote on it, I'd have a board member have an issue with that.
Sure.
Because that's not the process that the board wants.
So as I'm hearing this, I honestly, I need either some clarification, or I have some concerns that the OEA president not only came up with the A and B options, but then those were the only two options that were presented to OEA for voting on. Am I hearing that correctly?
Correct. So OEA president brought the two calendars, and then we sent those two options out to OEA and PSC staff.
So with Tony, I think in the past it's been a much larger group that he came up with the options, but the OEA got to determine of the two options which one they wanted. So interesting. I'm less comfortable.
I'm more
with this
concerned about the process than the end.
My understanding of the process, which would be consistent with previous calendar approvals, is that Colette is the messenger as the association president, so she would present those options for the district to share with the board and to consider. But there's a group of folks involved in OEA leadership that represent the Teachers Association that would work on that project, much like a board committee. It would be an association committee that develops those calendars, considering the constraints that are required by the number of days per month and whatnot.
So Pete, do you know if the contract says that they will actually, that the OEA will be part of not only forming a committee to determine the calendars, but also then approve, or is it just that the OEA will approve the two that the district with their committees will come up with? That part I don't know the answer to, so I'm curious.
It would probably take me 2 or 3 minutes here to look through that as the meeting continues, and if I'm able to find an answer, I could share it at that moment.
Okay. This is something that does not absolutely have to be approved tonight as well, if the board would rather table this to next board meeting.
But we have a motion, so we need to vote.
Yes, we do have to handle the motion, but before the motion, or before the vote, I wanted to let the board know that. So there's a motion on the table to approve this with only one item being removed. So any approval would approve the calendar as well. So with that, I'll take a vote. All in favor? Opposed?
Aye.
Aye. So that motion does not carry. And so there's still agenda item C1, and I'll accept another motion if anyone's got one.
I move to approve item C1 with the removal of subsection C1-3. No, it's already gone now, sorry. It was C1-3 before, right? Or 4? 4 and 5. Okay, gotcha. With the removal of C1-4 and C1-5, both to be tabled to the next meeting.
So there's been a motion by Director Ashton to approve item C1 with the removal of sub-item C1-4 and C1-5. Second by Director Mike Garza. Any discussion?
Do we have to put C1-4 at a public meeting, or can we discuss that privately and then vote at a public meeting? Or does that all have to be public?
If you have an executive session material, then you could ask that there be some executive session discussion, but the vote definitely has to be in public.
I get that it does have, right, I agree that the vote needs to be in public, but I don't know if that needs to be at an executive session or not. I don't know that part.
Are you talking about a discussion, Jen?
You probably need
Yes.
to get with the president later and tell him exactly what you're wanting to discuss, and maybe he could help you know if that's
Okay,
executive session
that's a great plan.
material.
I'll do that.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Any other discussion?
President Simmons, I have a question for you. Board Member Stevenson, prior to this meeting, asked me a question on C13. I provided her the answer, but I emailed a gentleman to follow up, and it turns out that I was incorrect. So I simply wanted to clarify that prior to the vote. I'm unclear if this is a good. I'm assuming this is a good time to do it, but I just
I think before we vote any.
So the question that Director Stevenson had was prior to the meeting was if for the bond council price, if it's on the entire bond amount or if it's on the two resulting sales. I was under the impression it was under the entire bond amount. However, I emailed our counsel, and he stated that I was incorrect, that it is under the two amounts.
Well, that's
So-
very fortunate for them, isn't it? Because they get more money.
So I just wanted
That's a
to
great question that I
wanted
never
to
thought of. I
clarify
assumed
that.
it was for the total.
I wanted to clarify that prior to the vote. So he just emailed me.
And we can't negotiate that? That's
I'm
it?
under the impression that we cannot, but I
Okay.
am not a lawyer. I do not
Thank
know.
you for checking that.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know what other options we have, so. Okay. So now we're ready to vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Now we'll move on to superintendent comments. There's just one item in here. One item in this is the donation from Consolidated Disposal Services. There's an attachment that explained it in detail very well. If any board members have questions on that, we can ask. Otherwise, we will move on.
I did have a question. Were those accounts, the balances that were negative, was that district-wide or specific schools?
That was district-wide.
And that was as of the end of the year or the day of the donation?
That was as of the last day of the school year 2017.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? All right.
No questions, just appreciation.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that the board has
that's amazing.
asked, is to always make sure we know about these donations so that we can be aware of them and share our appreciation, sometimes to individuals that we might see in the community. Okay. So we'll move on to item D1. I'm now 24 minutes behind. I have to work on this, apparently. I have a lot more faith that I'll be more efficient as a president than I am, I guess. So
I move to approve items D1, report, monitoring reports EL4 and EL5.
There's been a motion to approve or accept?
To accept.
Okay. There's a motion by Director Ashton to accept the two items under item D1, the EL4 and EL5 monitoring reports.
I'll second that.
And a second by Director Johnson. Any discussion?
Every meeting, just so I can make sure. We can accept those reports. That's where we do this now. But if we have questions, then that would come now. If we disagree, that would come in our Survey Monkey with details.
It'd come either in the Survey Monkey with details or in the next meeting when we monitor, when we find compliance or incompliance.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. We'll move on to, these are the monitoring response documents prepared by at the last board meeting. And before we vote on this, Dr. Hurst was not present at the last board meeting, as you know, so he had a couple questions or comments regarding our monitoring response documents. So,
Yes, just a question for Director Stevenson. I was not at the meeting, but I did have a chance to look at the Facebook Live. Excuse me. And we're very interested in reporting accurately as a district. I believe there was a comment or a question about the accuracy of information contained within an EL or a couple of ELs. So as I stated, we're just very interested as a district to make sure that we're doing accurate reporting or correcting as necessary. So just like to know if there's any information that we need to be aware of so we can make sure that we address or correct as needed.
I believe as I remember the discussion, and maybe I think you're referencing EL3, right?
Yes, sir.
Correct? Really the question came to the rapid responder had been out of compliance earlier in the year and then brought into compliance. Really the question and the discussion that came with the board just was that there is an EL that says that anytime a policy is out of compliance, it's your duty to let the board know it's out of compliance. And we felt that if it was out of compliance and brought back in, we weren't able to ask you if you found out the day you did the report that you were out of compliance 6 months ago, but it's almost a moot point because even if you didn't know, somebody should have known to inform you were out of compliance at that point, and the board should have got notified then. And that's really, I don't know if the way that comment's worded, it really summarizes that very well, but that's really what the discussion, as I remember it, was about. Was any time a policy is out of compliance, it's your responsibility to let the board know, even though it's not the time that you monitor that policy, if that makes sense. I think that from my memory is the issue was resolved and it's fixed going forward, but it was out of compliance for a time during the year.
And then my other comment is, how would you like me to do that? Would you like me to come and talk to you if I know that there is something by direct inspection or experience that is not being done according to your report? Or would you like me to do it in a meeting? Which way should I do that?
So Jen, I want to answer that
we have
because
a
it's policy. Regardless of what Dr. Hurst would like you to do, we need to follow policy as a board.
That's true.
And I'm
Thank
not saying
you.
that to be
Yes,
smart.
You're right. You're right.
But
Okay.
there is BSR. I thought about this as you had asked that, and Dr. Hurst had said to me, I'd really like to know what the issue was, and so I was wondering if is the appropriate way for Jen to go to me on that. But then I looked through policy. BSR 1, item 4 says members will refer to the superintendent regarding any compliments, complaints, or criticism about operational issues, so that issues and trends can be addressed and tracked. So it says members. To me, that means that a member can go directly to the superintendent for that.
Okay. So then you're telling me go to Chris with things that I had concerns on. Correct?
When you have compliments, complaints, or criticisms about
Okay.
operational issues, yep, you
And
policy allows you to go to the superintendent.
As a board, we need to not wait until the policies are coming up for compliance for that either.
As soon as you hear it.
There's no
Right.
reason to keep
Yeah.
it in your mind for 6 months. And I remember that I
No,
saw
I
this
think
6
it was
months
just
ago.
because I read this, I started paying attention and realized, oh, those things are not.
Yeah, and you've only been
Right.
on the board for 6 weeks. And
That's
so
true.
it's kind of hard
That
to
too. Right. Okay.
say you should have told him 6 months ago. But
Okay.
so you have a little bit more grace than some of the other
Thank
rest
you.
of us.
Thank you.
Okay, so if there are no other questions or comments, I'll accept a motion to approve item D2 EL monitoring response documents. Been a motion by Director Garza to approve.
Second.
Second by Director Johnson. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. We'll move on to item D3. Those are the BSR monitoring response documents. These were all documents drafted up at the last board meeting based on our responses to SurveyMonkey on how we interact with the superintendent. Is there a motion to approve these monitoring response documents?
Move to approve item D3.
Been a motion by Director Ashton to approve item D3 BSR monitoring response documents. Second by Director Garza. Any discussion?
I'll have some discussion.
Okay.
Okay.
So Jen,
Yes.
sorry to cut you off.
Please.
You can bring up discussion in an informal, it's not as formal of a Robert's Rules of Order in this setting. You can bring up discussion before a motion,
Okay.
after a first, or after a second, just so you know.
All right.
Sometimes you want to bring up discussion before because you think it might actually affect the motion, and that's okay, because it saves us some time from having to amend.
Take it
or-
out
yeah.
and okay. So on BSR 1, I think this was something that we need to either put at a later date or, BSR 1, yes. If we disagree as a board with the superintendent's interpretation, then what do we do with that monitoring document? What do we do then? That's what I'm trying to say.
You're referring specifically to the verbiage in BSR 1?
That's where I put it in my notes, but it doesn't look like that's where it's supposed to be. Now that I'm here. Definitely not here.
So
It's probably in the policy itself, so we'd have to go to the policies.
That's where it is. I'm sorry.
But if you felt like that we were not compliant in that policy, then we should have discussed that at the last meeting.
okay, you're actually asking about superintendent interpretation, correct?
Yes.
So you're asking about BSR. Hang on. I'm trying to figure out which BSR you're actually asking about.
Well,
I believe
it's three.
BSR 3.
I think it's actually three.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so the appropriate time to ask about that would be when we evaluate ourselves through SurveyMonkey. But there's never a bad time to bring up that for clarification. But right now, we're just approving the documents that we
Voted on last.
Yeah, we have a motion
time.
to approve the
Right.
documents, the monitoring response documents for the BSRs.
Okay.
So this discussion item, this isn't the right
This
place
needs,
for that.
right. We need to be in policy review for these discussions.
Yep, that policy review would be appropriate.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll move on then back to our motion and second to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. So we will now move on to item E1, policy review. I'm now only 20 minutes behind. I'm catching up. And now it's going to all go bad, isn't it? Okay, so there have been no submitted requested revisions to EL2 or EL3, so if there's no motions to make any changes there, I'm going to move on.
I'm sorry, you're saying.
This would be to change the
E1 and
policy.
2, or just E2, E1?
EL2 and EL3. No one has submitted any recommendations for revisions of those policies, so I'm assuming there's no motion for.
I don't have any revisions to the policies, except for that I brought up before that we need to keep the formatting consistent, and they're not. And I thought we had corrected them, but the formatting at the top.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
And because EL 1.2 last reviewed should now say a different date. It says September 25th, but we're after tonight that date should change. So I just want to clarify that we're going to change the top of these so they're all consistent. And EL 1 doesn't have any of that stuff.
Yes. Have we been clear as a board what we want? I mean, right now, if you look at EL3, there are 8 lines before you even get into the policy. Have we been clear about what we do want in that?
I know we went through it as a board, and I understand what each one of those means now. For me as a board member, I don't know if the rest of the board remembers what they all mean, but
When you say 8 lines, you mean book, section, title, number,
Exactly,
adopted,
yeah.
last revised, last reviewed?
some
Yep.
of that has to do with board docs and how it, I believe, and how it puts it in there. But
Okay.
the bottom 3 lines of the top were the ones that meant tempting
Yeah.
to me. The adopted is the original date, last revised is the last time the policy was changed, and the last reviewed is the last time we reviewed the policy and determined compliant, or we went through this review process.
Right.
So the bottom one should change every time the policy is reviewed of those 3. And if we're not going to change it, then we should take it out, because I don't know that it's imperative that it be in there, but I don't like it when it's in there and it says we reviewed it in September when we're reviewing it in January.
Right. So what do you do, though, in the case where a board member says, I'd like to table policy review on that until next meeting? Would you just then change the date
It doesn't
from
technically
today's?
change until it's
actually approved.
been through
Or-
review.
But I think you
I don't
did
even know that it
revise.
needs to be there, but
I think you did revise all of these in September because you added those lines.
those dates, they're right now, but what caught my mind is the other policy doesn't have any of that
Doesn't have
stuff.
the dates. Right.
And I was just reminding
Okay.
Talia that if this goes by without a review the way it is, that September 25th date needs to change to tonight.
And
Or
there-
if the board as a whole feels like we don't need to put in the last time it was reviewed, we could tell her to start taking them out. It's really not to me, it's not a big deal one way or the other, as long as the dates are right.
Right?
I do want to know when we adopted it and when it was last revised, but the other date just tells us as a board that we actually reviewed it.
I agree. What's the board feeling on that line, last reviewed? Does that need to be in there? Or do we always just assume it gets reviewed according to calendar, which we can't always assume that?
Okay, so we have a calendar to review these, but sometimes because of a certain situation or something that happened, we need to remember, well, then why did we look at this again in September? If we're doing this again, oh, that's right, because there was a problem.
Good point.
And that brings that back up sometimes, and we need to have that.
Or a board member just wants to make a policy recommendation, policy change recommendation. It could be not according to the calendar.
Right.
Good point.
So I think all three of those are important.
Leave them. Okay, so we just want to make sure that when this goes back into monitoring or into the board policies, that it has those items in it, I think is what's being asked, correct?
Yeah, 1.1 needs to be updated. But it's not actually the policy itself, so it's just formatting.
Just adding reviewed and revised, yes. Okay. Now, so can we move on to BSR? Is everyone comfortable going to item E2? Okay, so this is specifically a request for any changes to these policies, recommended revisions. Are there any recommended revisions to these policies?
I do not have the exact wording, but we need to include something about under 3, when we review their performance. Wait.
Which 3, sorry? BSR
Okay.
3?
BSR, I'm in BSR 1, number 3. Oh, let's see. I disagree with the way that this is worded, because if we disagree with his interpretation of the ends or the limitations, then it's not identical. The performance is not identical.
So I think that this policy is just stating that any organizational accomplishment from a board perspective, that is, we are evaluating only the superintendent, and it's going to reflect positively or negatively on the superintendent. Is that correct?
That's the intent of that wording.
Yeah, so.
Okay.
So if you believe the wording of that is not correct, then you would submit a recommended revision, and then they put a side-by-side, Talia would put a side-by-side comparison, and then the board would look at those changes and and we'd vote on whether or not we agree with the revision.
Okay, then, like was discussed at an earlier meeting, I need these like a week ago. I don't need these like Friday.
Well, you can pull them up anytime.
Yeah.
To look at them.
So whatever we do a survey
After
monkey
we-
on, the next
okay.
board meeting, it'll be in policy review. So at any time
Okay.
before that, if you have recommended changes, feel free to make those. When I sent the text out, just reminding the board that if there's any policy review recommended changes come, that's when you would shoot them over to Talia.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I do, Jen, maybe that'll help you, is if I'm in a meeting and we're doing compliance and I feel like, hey, the policy's not written the way I like, I go and work on the policy the next day and get it all redone the way while it's fresh, and then I'll send it to the president then. You can send it, you don't have to wait till the Friday to send it to him either. That's just the last day that you can give it to him and still have it go to this policy time, this board meeting.
So does that need to be sent to me, or does the board feel that can be bypass me and go right to Talia or to Dr. Hurst?
My personal feeling is it should go to you, but it's whatever the board thinks.
I'd just straight to Talia if it's going to be on side-by-side. I mean, it's not like you're going to...
Yeah, I would expect Dr. Hurst to make me aware of it in our agenda meeting. But I'm not going to have an opinion about it till we are in the board meeting. as far as.
I like to make extra work for you. I'm always going to send it to you.
Kind of got the sense. I wasn't going to say it.
The president needs to do something.
What do you think, Ken?
I think just send it straight to Talia.
Okay. Tony, you go ahead and send yours to mine, or to me, and I'll make sure it gets forwarded on to Talia.
Do all these have the same formatting? I'm just checking them one by one here.
I'm looking at BSR 1. It doesn't have last reviewed. It just has last revised after adopted.
Okay.
So we'll just make sure that that's also. Okay, so no recommended changes to those policies right now is what I see. So we're going to move on to item. There is no item, no need for executive session, so on to item G1, upcoming events.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Is this the appropriate time to request a workshop as we talk about upcoming events?
I would say so.
Okay. I did pull the item, the awarding the lease. I would like to request that we have a workshop to not discuss approving the lease, but to discuss modifications and potential modifications to our property that need to be made, just so that as a board member I can understand better the different options. I'd like to ask that we as a board invite the irrigation district to come, whoever that we got bids from to put in pipes or not put in pipes to come, and have Brian there so that I can really, I just feel like as a board member I really need to understand the ins and outs of how that would work if we leased to one individual or the other. But I don't necessarily want to approve that lease that night. I just want to understand what all of our options are, because I'm not sure we've discussed them all yet.
Do we need to have those that gave us the quotes there as well?
From my perspective, we don't, but because we're just talking about how we prepare the ground for each leasing. I don't know that we need to have them there.
Okay.
I'd be okay with that, but I don't know what value it would be.
I think I understand your request. It's going to be up to the board whether or not they would like to have that meeting as well, the workshop. Ken, what are your feelings?
I definitely agree. I would like to be educated a little bit more to understand. I believe we should get the best value out of that land as possible, and if it takes us to making an investment into it too, possibly, I'd like to see that, to see if it would be feasible.
Okay, and I'm seeing a nod from you, Jen. Yes. All right, and Mike?
For sure. I don't know the main reason to have it is to make sure somebody, a representative of the irrigation district can be there, and at least one representative that gave us the quotes for the work. Because we just know the scope that's been told to us. I want to talk about all other areas and avenues and ways we could cover every option.
So then there's a consensus that we want
I think it would be
workshop?
beneficial to have someone from FFA, because we had originally talked about having them farm it as well, or at least a portion of it, from our local, the high school students that we had talked about. Right. We need to have that person there as well.
The board agree with that? Okay. So what date would the board like to do this? We've got, I'll just mention the January 15th.
If those individuals can come and work on a holiday.
15th, we have a policy governance workshop from.
Before it or after it. Yeah, I like combining things together, not meeting twice.
We currently have a policy governance workshop from 12 to 2. On the 16th, we have a board and PTA dinner from 6 to 8 in the evening. And February 6th is our Ludacage Elementary School Board site visit. Those are all of our extra meetings outside of our normal meetings.
My personal preference would be to be the 15th or the 16th, not wait until February.
So if we did it the 15th, are you thinking like 11?
11 or 2.
Yeah, I'll be working on the 15th, so I got 12 to 2 is taking up my what I can devote during the day, but I have evening off.
I'm open all
Well, depends. Depends on, you're going to be basically getting an understanding of the interpretation of the policies. So it all depends on I guess, where you're at with your understanding of the interpretation. It's hard to predict that.
I'd also be okay, I guess, in line with what Ken's saying, of starting the workshop discussing the land lease, ending it with the policy governance training, and we'll end it too, and if we have to continue our governance training at another date, we can continue it.
Okay. How long do you think the land lease discussion you'd want for that?
An hour at the most.
Okay, so we 12 to 1, and then 1 to 2 for the other items. Okay, so I guess we're not changing our workshop. We're just changing the scope of the workshop.
Depending on people being available.
We may have to come up with a second option.
Under the assumption that those people will be available, which they may not be.
Yeah, well, ag director on a day that they don't have school would be difficult, I would think.
And the director of the irrigation district might be difficult as well. I don't know that they work that.
Yeah.
Well, we're never going to know until we try.
So do you want to come up with let's come up with a second option in case that one doesn't work.
What about before the PTA meeting?
At 5?
At 5?
Would work for me.
For an alternate?
What do you think, Mike? Ken? Okay. So do we like that as option 1 or option 2?
I think we need that as option 2.
Okay. So I will get together with Dr. Hurst to set that up. We'll make sure we get invites out to people, see if they're available. Okay. All right. So now, if there's no more events that anyone can think of that I've missed, then I'm trying to just do events this month and our upcoming month that are outside of our normal board meetings, our regular board meetings. So now we'll move on to our board self-assessment. Okay, looks like we have 6 answers. So who does this one, the self-assessment? Right now it's just board members, right? We've always done it.
I think what happened was that I accidentally clicked back and clicked submit again somehow. They shouldn't have accepted my answer twice, but
Okay.
it
Well.
doesn't help your story.
Well, thank you, Tony. All right, so the first item, the agenda was well planned to focus on the real work of the board. Average of 4.5 on that. The board followed its agenda and did not get sidetracked, 4.33. The board's deliberations and decision-making process were public, 4.83. Nice job, board. Participation was balanced. All participated. No one dominated, 4.0. Members listened attentively, avoiding side conversations, 4.67 average. Board actions occurred at policy level rather than operational level. All said yes. The board reviews policy about each topic before discussing that issue. Looks like all said yes. In writing additional policies, the board starts with a broad statement and becomes more detailed and in a logical and disciplined sequence. Good job. Everyone realized that that was not the case tonight. No, we did not write any additional policies. The board chair helps the board efficiently conduct its meeting. All said yes, and the board supports the superintendent in any reasonable interpretation of its policies. We did not evaluate the superintendent through monitoring today, but everyone felt that was true.
I believe the student reps could do these, right?
That's what I was asking. I was thinking that would be something that's
Caden and I were discussing. We decided my extra click was actually her. So then now we're good.
So and basically this doesn't limit it. So anyone who clicks in can answer, right? All right. I don't want people getting carried away on this. We could have like community members that are starting to evaluate us, right? It is a board self-evaluation. Remember that. Okay, so the average 4.67, and we're done with that. And now we will move on to item G3. I'll accept a motion to adjourn. Motion by Director Garza, second by Director Stevenson. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Meeting adjourned.